Hello, my name is Howard Silverman. This talk is about recursive identity, and this is a revised version of the talk I gave last year in Vancouver. My interest in identity is as a means of investigating social change, that is, continuities and discontinuities in social relations. I begin with a set of propositions. The cybernetic first and second order is a complementary construct that describes a fundamental human relationship. This first-second complementarity may be formulated in multiple ways. And so I ask, would a model of recursive identity afford a distinctly variant formulation? That's what I want to investigate. I think of my methods as designerly. And so I begin by stating my rationale and then frame an area of inquiry, appreciatively survey existing approaches, develop a variant approach, examine analogies and distinctions across approaches, and then consider implications for research or practice. So here's the model, a simple fill-in-the-blank statement. I describe it as a participatory model, a performative model. If this were a workshop situation, I would ask each of us to perform the model. My own performance goes something like this. Among my siblings, I'm the youngest. I teach in a design program in an art school, all entangled in institutions of accreditation, norms of pedagogy, and so on. In a man's world, I'm a man. In a land colonized by white people, I'm a white person. Among living organisms, I'm a living organism, or trillions. Now, this might seem like an odd sort of model, and yet it does meet most of the criteria set out by Bernard Scott in this recent paper. And then it has this other advantage, that is, it allows life to be explored in vivo. Moreover, like other models, it affords a particular view, not the only or correct one. I formulate this model in a series of steps. First, as a Varelian complementarity, that is, a pair of asymmetrical terms that mutually specify each other, mutually reference each other. Analogous to Varela's examples in his 76 paper, 79 book chapter. Also as a first-second formulation, that is, my own involvement is specified. I'm the participant in the context. The system in the environment is me. And then in terms of recursive identity, where by identity I mean a system's conservation and continuity of relations, and by a recursive identity I mean conservations and continuities both of and between my identities and those of the systems with which I couple. I describe the view afforded by this model through a three-part framework: transcontextual, situated, and coupled. By transcontextual, I mean, for example, that in the family, I'm a son, a sibling, a husband, different contexts. By situated, I mean that, for example, my experience of being in a man's world is different from a woman's, for example. By coupled, I mean that I'm embedded and entangled in organizational, social, and ecological systems, all of which can be characterized in terms of continuities and discontinuities. Now, there are challenges to an identity approach. In Varela's terms, one's world does not equal the environment. For example, I belong to the same family as my siblings, but my experiences are hardly identical to theirs. That is, within a particular relational environment, such as the family, people affiliated with this environment each experience differing worlds. Stated another way, my situated world constructing is constrained and afforded by the environments with which I couple. So here's the analogy that I've been investigating. von Foerster's formulation, and a recursive identity formulation. When I lay it out in this way, what catches my attention is this first line here. And to what extent is a context, as I've been describing it, analogous to what is observed in von Foerster's formulation? Another way to ask this is to ask, is a context a type of Foersterian object? Or as Broughton asked back in the 80s, can an observer see the life world in which she swims? I pursue this question through a series of visual formulations. So here I have visual formulations or descriptions thereof, and then first-second diagrams in which I try to simplify what's going on here. And so here's the Bates and Mead diagram. And the first order is the box, as Bateson calls it, or the object. And to take a second order stance means to include oneself in relationship to the first order system. Here are a couple of diagrams drawn by Varela in his 76 and 79 paper and chapter, and he described them as an imbrication of levels, where one term of the pair emerges from the other. And so what I see here is that the 79 version of Varela's diagram is analogous to the Bates and Mead diagram. Moving on, here's an adaptation of an illustration in Ray Eison's 2010 book, and it shows a person in a situation and then the same person stepping out of the situation to reflect on one's own participation. And so here's how I've simplified that down here. Now, the model of recursive identity, where the first order is the identity of the world environment of focus, and the second order is one's own identity, recursively coupled with that of the world environment of focus. And so I draw it like this, where the first order is here, the context, the life world in which I swim, and the second order is here. That's me swimming in the life world, embedded in the context. And so drawn this way, what I see is that it's the opposite of the Bates and Mead diagram. It's analogous to the 76 version of Varela's pair. So because my interest is in social change, I think of these as practical challenges, and I want to learn to describe them as such. So this first one I describe as the challenge of resisting objectification and reification. The challenge of awareness of self-reference, Varela's term. The challenge of going meta, Ray Eison's term, not merely doing things right, but questioning what's right. The challenge of double loop learning. And here, the challenge of awareness of one's transcontextuality, situatedness, and couplings. Now, stated in this way, this starts to look like a framework for what it is that I or we do when I or we do second order cybernetics. So that's the talk. As I described in the methods, I think of it as a bricolage from the cybernetics literature as seen through the lens of a particular model, which I've interpreted as a model of recursive identity. Thanks.